Okay, so asylum seekers. Part of those who apply for asylum receive asylum, and about half of asylum seekers are eventually rejected. The percentage fluctuates a bit from country to country, of course, from year to year. But it's safe to say that a significant amount of asylum seekers are eventually rejected, and this raises the question of, okay, what happens with them? Governments face a significant problem of return. In many cases, those who are rejected are not really willing to leave, and countries of origin are also quite reluctant to cooperate with forced return. And when you speak about the gap hypothesis, this is a very, I think, typical group where the gap hypothesis seems to be true. If you look at, this is data on the, what you should do, like this. I don't see any light. Okay. Well, this is the, these are data about the 2005 cohort. These were asylum seekers who were rejected in the Netherlands in the first instance in 2005. Asylum procedures are quite complex legally, so the people are rejected initially, and then they can appeal, and if they lose the appeal, they can also appeal again before they eventually become undocumented and are supposed to return to the country of origin. What we find is the red line here is the percentage of people who are rejected in the first instance who, after 7 years, in the 2005-2011 period, eventually returned to the country of origin with the IOM, the International Organization for Migration. So made use of assisted voluntary return, as it is called. And then a smaller part were deported, that's the purple part, and the green part are those who managed to obtain a residence permit in the second instance, so after appealing. So a minority of those who were rejected eventually returned. But then in the Netherlands, what happened is that this percentage increased. First, there was an increase in deportation. This is the 2007 cohort. People who were rejected in 2007. And then in 2009, we collected data until 2011. Already about 15% of those who were rejected returned with IOM within 2 years, whereas in 2005 it was just 5% in 7 years. So this raises the question, and also deportation rates increased significantly, but this paper focused on AVR, so people returning with IOM. So this raises the question of, okay, what happened in this period? Like Hatton raised the question, what happened with decreasing asylum rates? Here we can ask sort of a mirror question, what happened with increasing AVR and deportation rates? So this is the research problem, is the focus of the paper. Why is this important? I think, well, policy factors are still under research, of course, in migration studies. So a lot of work has been done on that by Hein and others. But especially, there's very little, limited research on return migration, policy effects on return migration. Very few studies pay attention to more positive sanction. I'll talk later, explain later a bit more what I mean with that, and normative aspects of compliance. A lot of studies that pay attention to policy effects, they focus on deterrence as sort of the main explanatory mechanism. And here you have people who are already in the territory, and they are, deterrence is one of the mechanisms that is used by governments to try to ensure AVR participation, but there are also other mechanisms. Okay, before I go into theory a bit more, I think it's good to explain the method. Moving around a bit. What we did, we obtained data from the Immigration and Naturalization Service on all rejected asylum seekers in this period, 2005-2011. And we linked it on the individual level using so-called fee numbers to IOM return data. And we linked it to data on deportation. And then we added information about countries of origin, about political and economic conditions in countries of origin on the country year level. So for example, we obtained information from Amnesty International on the level of political terror in Iraq in 2005. or the GDP in Afghanistan in 2007. Then we conducted multiple logistic regression, hierarchical regression, because we have nested data. But explain in what category people are, whether they did not return with IOM within 2 years after they had been rejected in the first instance, and we excluded all those who obtained a residence permit later, or who returned with IOM in the year of the rejection or the subsequent calendar year. So in the zero category, I should explain that just a bit. There are also people maybe who returned completely without any assistance. So that's one of the methodological limitations of the data. It also includes people who maybe go to South European countries as regular immigrants, but that's not methodologically such a problem, because also that's in fact a form of overstaying, you could argue. And it also includes people who were deported. So this is the nested data that we have. So we have individuals, about 16,000, and in fact individuals are also nested in families, because sometimes people apply with families, but we selected one people from each family. So we have individuals, adults, who are nested in country years. So for example, Iraq 2005, and that's the year of the rejection. Because the data on Iraq 2005 are quite similar to the data on Iraq 2006 and 7, you could also, these country years are also nested in countries. Maybe for economists this is quite easy to understand, but for a lot of social scientists it's more puzzling. Okay, so if you want to understand this rise, what happened with this rise in AVR? Is it related to policy changes or non-policy changes? First with the non-policy change, because there's more literature about that. Black, for example, Richard Black has done research on that, and says, well, one of the reasons why a lot of rejected asylum seekers do not return is that the conditions for return are not met. They're supposed to return to countries that are unsafe, basically. Others, that although political conditions are important, economic conditions also matter for rejected asylum seekers. Because in many cases they have been away for a while, or they have sold their house, and there need to be opportunities, also economic opportunities to return. So these are indicators. So we have two indicators from their indexes, an index by Amnesty International. Freedom House is an index by the NGO Freedom House on the liberty in different countries of origin. And from the World Bank we took data on GDP, PPP per capita in order to measure the sort of economic life chances in countries of origin. That's not the only factor. If you want to understand return behavior, you should also pay attention to social attachments of people, whether they have family, maybe in country of origin, or if they have family in the country where they apply for asylum. We could not measure this in very direct ways, because this is mostly administrative data, so we have to be a little bit creative to measure this. But you could argue that those who are a little bit older will have a relatively strong attachment to the country of origin, because they migrated at a higher age. And there is research also showing that people who migrate at a higher age have stronger attachments in the country of origin. And therefore can be expected to be more inclined to return. For females tend to follow males in migration. That's also especially the case for asylum seekers. So in case the person's female, there is more likely, there's the chance that there's a sort of settlement intention, that the settlement intention is stronger than when there's only a male who migrates. Then we constructed a variable family status from 1 to 6, and 6 are applicants who have children in the school age. They're the less likely to return because they have this tie to the country of immigration, and 1 are the ones unaccompanied but married with a partner in the country of origin that are the most likely to return. Then the policy factors. I'm very interested in policy factors, and perhaps because the economists have such strong influence on migration studies, a lot of them, they are focused on sort of a rational choice model with negative and positive, mostly deterrence, but maybe also positive sanctions here with IOM, people receiving money to return. But if you look on the literature on compliance with policy, in criminology, sociology of law, there's also a lot of studies that show that normative aspects of compliance and non-compliance are also very important, and that they also shape people's behavior. So, and there are usually distinctions made between distributive justice and procedural justice. For example, procedures have been very fair. People were giving lawyers, if enough time was taken to make a good decision, then you could expect people are more inclined to cooperate with the decision than if they didn't have a lawyer or if they were rejected immediately. So our indicator for that was, for the positive sanctions, there, I should explain, do I have time? I'm not going to tell about that. But we had, I'm going to focus on the two final ones. For the normative aspects, there were, for some countries, there were native counsellors available. And native counsellors, they are employees by IOM that are from the country of origin. And they approach rejected asylum seekers in their own language. And they are more inclined to establish trust with rejected asylum seekers than if somebody from the majority group tries to contact them and talk about return. And the status determination time is about the amount of time that the government needs to make a decision. And we hypothesize that if it's if the rejection is reached very quickly, or if it takes a lot of months, then the perceived legitimacy of the outcome will be lower than if it's more average time of determination. 2 minutes, I'm going to make it almost. These are 3 cohorts. I deleted the 2006 and 2009 cohort. And what you see in red is that if there has been a trend, it's mostly that the GDP per capita increased in these years in countries of origin, also reflecting perhaps decreasing international inequality. The native counsellor availability increased. And there were some, also importantly, I should mention that the deportation risk also increased significantly. And then we go to the models. So the first model is just a model with, I also deleted the 2007-2009 dummies there, just couldn't fit. So the first model is we just have the period effects. So basically in 2010 people had a 3 times higher probability or odds to return with IOM than in 2005. And then first we control for the policy factors. And what we see is that people are indeed less inclined to return to countries that are unsafe or unfree, and also more inclined to return to richer countries. And the people are less inclined to return if they have a child who goes to school in the country of asylum application. But basically it doesn't really change the period effects very much. There's a decrease of about maybe 10%, from 2.94 to 2.64. So a lot of the increase in AVR remains unexplained. And then you go to model 3 when we add the policy variables, and we see again a decrease which is a little bit larger. So we think that most of this increase in AVR was caused by policy measures, especially the increased availability of the native counsellors. And people, I should say maybe a little bit about this, coming from near Eastern European countries, trying to, in order to make use of the return benefits, because it's actually quite substantial. People can get 6,000 to 7,000 euros if they return with IOM. So, and this has attracted real bogus asylum seekers. You could argue from places like Macedonia, people came with buses to make use of it, and they were eventually excluded. And then in the final model, we also estimated the effect of the deportation risk, so the risk that the people have if they do not leave with IOM, and you find that if a relatively large number of people are deported from your country of origin in your cohort, then people are also more inclined to make use of AVR. So you actually do find a sort of deterrent effect there in what is called voluntary return. Okay, so I'm at the end. This rise in AVR seems mostly policy related, so actually I have an opposite conclusion than happened. And interesting, I think that different policy mechanisms drive AVR involvement that are also responsible for this increase. part because of the increased money, but also the native counselor availability and the increased deportation risk. So it's a combination. Last slide. This also, I think the analysis shows that AVR, although it's called voluntary return, is part and parcel of the deportation regime. And it's but it's just, it uses force less than pure deportation. It's more, people are maybe try to seduced into leaving, and there's also this threat of deportation in the background. So I think we as scientists should, people have criticized the term voluntary return before, but we haven't really thought of a term of our own. So I propose maybe use the term soft deportation for AVR in this context. And then finally, my final point, I think this could be a nice platform to discuss ethical issues of looking into the effectiveness of migration policies. It's maybe most obvious with this type of research when it involves rejected asylum seekers who are vulnerable. But it also goes for other research. Even if we document all these unintended consequences, it potentially contributes also to better or more effective border control.